So welcome to the concluding trip, Trip 5 of UnCruise, sponsored by Friends of the Rouge, promoters and advocates for the watershed of all watersheds. This year, our annual Rouge Cruise is virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, we deemed it an UnCruise. While we miss seeing you in person and wish you could be out on the river with us tonight, doing so could potentially expose you to an illness that has taken over 6,800 Michiganders. And I'm very sad to say that that number was at 6,500 when we started this trip. So instead, hop on board Sally and Paul's kayak and visit the Rouge River from a new perspective, seeing places the Diamond Bell could not reach and hearing from different voices about the projects and entities that shaped its history and make the river what it is today. Narrated by Friends of the Rouge board and staff, we trust that you will learn new things and enhance your sense of place with the historic and dynamic Rouge River. So our trip tonight has all four unnarrators. I am Sally Petrella, monitoring manager at Friends of the Rouge, where I also work on our water trail. Along with narrating tonight, I was the lucky one to paddle the route in my kayak with a GoPro camera with the assistance of my husband, Paul Stark.
Hi. I'm Orin, Gelderloos, Professor of Biology and Professor of Environmental Studies at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. I recently retired from active teaching, but continue to do research as an associate of the Environmental Interpretive Center. I'm also pleased to be a member of the Board of Trustees of the Friends of the Rouge.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marie McCormick, Executive Director at Friends of the Rouge. I also assist in the Water Trail Strategic Development. I am so pleased to join you this evening and featuring this beautiful crown that my 5-year-old daughter made for me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Draus. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. That's me right there in the red kayak. I also sit on the board of directors for the Friends of the Rouge, and I have been facilitating the Fort Rouge Gateway Partnership, or FROG Partnership, since around 2012. I got to be the narrator on the actual live Rouge Cruise last year, and I'm very happy to be helping with this UnCruise as we set off into uncharted territory for us, our first attempt at virtual tours, or actually our 5th attempt at this point.
Yep. So this is the 5th segment of a trip that we started on August 11th down at Zug Island and end tonight at Fairlane Estate. Here's a close-up map of tonight's trip that starts at the Hubbell-Southfield CSO facility and ends again at the Fairline Estate. So let's get cruising. We now continue our voyage and head upstream along the concrete channel, hoping to find some respite from all of this concrete. Unlike earlier trips where there was so many interesting things there is something interesting to see right here. We were really surprised to see this white-tailed deer. Surveys conducted by U of M Dearborn annually have found around 75 deer in this area, a little more than these natural habitats can sustain without losing biodiversity of plant species. So if you imagine that you're a fish swimming up from the Detroit River past a concrete bottom that provides no shade, no shelter, no food, and no nesting areas. About 20 years ago, the Henry Ford started working with partners on a project to restore a former bend in the river to create habitat for fish coming up from the Detroit River. But before we show you this, we want you to understand the partnership that made this and many other projects along the route happen. So we got a chance to talk with George Morose from the Henry Ford about a partnership formed in 1999 called the Rouge River Gateway Partnership that focused on the last 8 miles of the Rouge River that we are featuring on this UnCruise, the Gateway. First, he will tell us a little bit about the Henry Ford and why they changed the name. So here's George.
My name is George Morose. I'm actually the Special Assistant to the President and the Senior Director for External Relations at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. I've been with the Henry Ford now for 24 years. We had a brand name change a number of years back, and that's when we switched from Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village to Henry Ford. It has been wonderfully adopted by the public. That being said, I will say that locals, regardless of that name change, still often refer to us singularly as the village. So, and that's okay with us. A colleague and dear friend of mine named Ed Bigell, who used to be the vice chancellor at the University of Michigan-Dearborn, had worked very closely with us. And we co-founded what was then called the Rouge River Gateway Partnership. And the members of the partnership were entities of all different sorts that had some vested interest, in particular, our stretch of the Rouge River. So that included cities. So the city of Dearborn was involved. It included the county, so Wayne County was involved. It included educational institutions like Henry Ford College and University of Michigan-Dearborn. It included cultural institutions like the Henry Ford. It included a number of municipalities along our stretch of the river and a number of private businesses. We were trying to imagine lots of different kinds of development or redevelopment that could occur along various portions of the river. But this was a decades-long, multifaceted initiative, the central purpose of which was to reclaim the Rouge River as a natural, educational, recreational, and aesthetic asset for the community and for generations to come.
Thank you, George, for sharing this history and personal experience. In 2005, Gateway Partnership members laid out a comprehensive vision for the river that this Rouge River Gateway Master Plan is, in many ways, we are still pursuing today. Many of these projects and goals have come to fruition or are in the works. The plan includes a number of projects designed to restore relationships between the Rouge and natural and social systems. The first project was the building of the Environmental Interpretive Center at the University of Michigan-Dearborn, a center dedicated to educating the communities of Southeast Michigan on environmental issues, particularly those related to urban areas, and providing experiential learning for young and old and older folks alike. It opened in 2001, and Friends of the Rouge assisted in planting this beautiful rain garden in front. A gateway trail from Hines Park all the way to Zug Island is a key element of the plan and is being built in phases, and we'll hear more about that later on this trip. Ecosystems are strengthened by projects like the greening of the Rouge Manufacturing Complex, the restoration of an Oxbow at Greenfield Village, bank stabilization at Henry Ford Community College, and a fish ladder around historic landmark dam at the Ford Fairlane Estate. Detroit Water and Sewage Department even had plans to cover a 12-acre concrete CSO storage facility with a songbird meadow, although this has not happened yet. The Army Corps of Engineers was studying models for partial removal of the concrete channel, the one that we were just enjoying a few moments ago, in order to create new fish habitat and natural riverbanks. Slowed down by the first Persian Gulf War, 16 years later, the Army Corps is moving forward on these plans, as you heard from Paul Powell on our last UnCruise trip. I got involved with the Downriver Delta Community Development Corporation, formerly known as the Fort Visger CDC, in the early 2010s, through community-based work that my students and I were doing in Southwest Detroit at the time. I had also begun to do interviews in the Oakwood Heights neighborhood, which was then being transformed into green space by Marathon Petroleum Corporation. Through conversations with Ed Bigale at my university, the University of Michigan-Dearborn, I learned of the plans to replace the old Fort Street Bridge. Ed retired in 2012, and he was looking for others to take up the torch for the Rouge. He said that he felt that it was his job to get people in a room and get them talking, and then to keep them talking until something great happens. I will always remember what he taught me, that half of leadership is just keeping that conversation going. This continuing conversation soon became centered on the Fort Street Bridge Park project, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but with a view towards transforming the way the entire industrial Rouge corridor was viewed and experienced. The name that we eventually gave to the group was the Fort Rouge Gateway, or FROG Partnership. We felt that FROG was a fitting acronym because the frog is an animal that represents adaptation and transformation, as well as environmental sensitivity. The connection to Downriver Delta, a group focused on building a regional identity for the near downriver region, including all the sites we have seen along this 5-week journey, was also quite fitting. We saw the development of the Fort Street Bridge Park as a kind of toehold in this region, enabling the vision of a revitalized Rouge to gain purchase among the silos and the smokestacks.
Thanks, Paul. Now we are going to head back to the fish and to the Oxbow. You can see the southern opening to the Oxbow coming up on your left. An oxbow is a U-shaped bend in a river that gets cut off from the main channel, forming an island. The water around Fordson Island you saw in Trip 3 is also an oxbow. We're going to bring George back to tell us all about this very successful project that the Rouge River fish are all about. Here's George.
From an old aerial photograph that we had in our collections, that there had once been an oxbow off the main river channel on our property. Our idea, as part of our project, as part of the Rouge River Gateway Master Plan, was to restore the oxbow, excavate it, get it filled with water again, and return that part of the river to the natural kind of habitat that could support all different kinds of wildlife. The main objective of this project was to restore valuable fish and wildlife habitat within the Rouge, and to restore the wetlands that were lost due to this concrete channelization. Secondary objective of the project was really to improve water quality and to increase floodplain storage, also to provide new educational and interpretive and recreational opportunities, and lastly, but not insignificantly, to actually improve some of the aesthetics on the village grounds. The channel that we redug was actually 2,200 feet long. The width of the channel varies from about 15 feet to over 100 feet. And the depth of the water in that Oxbow channel varies from about 3 foot to 8 foot. So there are some deeper pools in the Oxbow. One of its essential features was, again, just with the concrete channel, there were no things like fish nurseries left anymore. So little fingerlings, they got no place to go because, again, they're just like in this flume. But the Oxbow provided that kind of nursery habitat. It also provided foraging cover for both fish and amphibians, reptiles, and mammals that came to the area. Fish were no longer breeding in our part of the Rouge River, just in the concrete channel. Because again, there were no suitable breeding grounds for that to take place. The Oxbow provided that opportunity. We've had the DNR come out on several different occasions. And this is even before we had the cuts, the full cuts into the river. So what's happening with siphons. They came out one time, and I remember this number. They found 19 species of fish. We even had an eagle nesting right adjacent to the Oxbow on our property. So the last piece of this puzzle is to remove the CSO that bisects the Oxbow right now. But that's probably going to take another 1.5 to 2 years.
Do you not want people to just paddle in there as long as they stay in their boats right now? You want people to stay out?
We can't tell them not to. They can paddle and stay in their boats, but again, they're not going to be able, at this point, to go from one end of the Oxbow to the other end of the Oxbow and get back in the main channel. there is a possibility that in the future, we could have a waterway entry into Greenfield Village. Whether or not that comes to fruition remains to be seen, but it's certainly something we've thought about. There have been some concept sketches as to what that might look like. But frankly, I think it would be very cool if our National Historic Landmark campus, people could travel there via their cars, via the John Dingell Transit train station, via a high-speed train, and via a waterway entrance off of the Rouge River. I think that would be very, very cool.
So thank you, George, for this project, and the fish and the wildlife. Thank you too. Your project's a model for what the U.S. Army Corps might do on other parts of the river. And I'm really pleased that George is also joining us tonight, and he's willing to answer any of your questions. So we are taking you up the newly constructed southern entrance of that Oxbow. So fish coming up from that concrete channel can come right in here and reach this natural bank with lots of shade, shelter, food, and places for nesting. But as we paddled in here, we noticed that these knockdown trees weren't knocked down by the wind, but actually we saw evidence that beavers have been working in this area, like we showed you on trip 1 by Zug Island. And just in case you don't believe us that there are beaver in the Rouge River, this is a photo of an actual beaver in the Rouge River in the winter near Ford Field in Dearborn. So we are now going to head back out of this Oxbow, since it won't be until about 2022 that we can paddle all the way around. So we are passing under Eagle Lane and then heading towards the concrete channel. But before we go any farther, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our fish surveys on the Oxbow. We've been doing fish surveys in the Oxbow for quite a few years now, 3-4 years. And this year we received funding from the state to do some of these fish surveys, and then COVID hit. And because sampling puts people very close together, we can't maintain that 6-foot different distance at all times. We had a very strict protocol. We wore masks all the time, and we also limited our crew to our 2 fish technicians, Bob and Phil, as well as 2 very experienced volunteers, Bill Eisenman and Jared Jankowski, and myself. And you can see I like to be the bucket girl to get all the fish. We showed you the electroshocking method that the state uses for their fish. Unlike the DNR, we use seine nets, which is basically a long net, and you can see those floats on the top of the net, and then the lead weights on the bottom of the net. So we chase the fish in and then pull the net up and scoop them up. So we can look down in here and see, did we find any fish? Looks like we caught a crayfish, we caught some gizzard shad. See that cool tool that Bob's using right there? We actually call that a fish bong. So it's a great little thing to scoop up fish. Here's another example from when we're farther in the channel. Jared there is scaring the fish out from the vegetation, stomping around and using that net to scare them into the net. And now Bill and Phil are pulling up the net. So let's see, what do we find here? Looks like we got some bluegill, although I do see quite a few round goby in that net too. We seldom catch very many catfish in the Rouge, so we were excited to see these yellow bullheads along with some other minnows. This little fish is called a northern log perch. It is a type of perch. It's a darter. These fish are clearly moving up the river from the Detroit River. We first started seeing them in 2012 on the lower, and they hadn't been seen there in many, many years. They do hunt in schools, flipping small stones with their snouts for the fish behind them to find the macroinvertebrates, so thus the name log perch. Another perch that you might be more familiar with is the yellow perch. Though this is a young one, it's a little harder to see the stripes. Like log perch, they are also moving into the Rouge River, and they benefited from the opening of the Wayne Road Dam. We also did catch large schools of gizzard shad. Compared to electrofishing, our techniques miss some of the large fish, but we get a good picture of the whole community because we do get the small ones. Seine nets catch the benthic fishes like darters and gobies that when you electrofish, you do tend to miss. We've documented 25 native species in the Oxbow since we began sampling here in 2017 and 2 invasive species. This summer, we found 1,025 fish, 21 native species, and 2 non-native, common carp and round goby. We sampled the 2 sides separately and have seen an increase in species diversity in the north side since it was open to the channel in 2019. Unfortunately, though, 16% or 160 of the 1,025 fish we caught were the invasive round goby. Along with fish, we often catch crayfish and other benthic macroinvertebrates. You might recognize this as a giant water bug, also known as a toe biter, but what are those odd things on his back? Those actually are eggs. The sex life of water bugs is very interesting. Known as back brooders, the males attract females by doing push-ups. After mating 10 to 50 times, the male then allows the female to lay her eggs on his back. He carries them around for several weeks until the baby water bugs hatch. What a good dad. We are now going to take a short break for comments and questions. But before we break, I want to give a warm thank you to the 2020 Rouge UnCruise event series sponsors, AK Steel, Smith Group, Ann Ivory Studios, Burns McDonnell, Carmoose, Hardno, ECT, Giffords Webster, Honeywell, Mannix Smith Group, Marathon Petroleum, MJ, Midwestern Consulting, MJ Electric, OHM, and to all of the Rouge UnCruise supporters. So I'm going to turn it over to Marie right now for some questions.
Well, thank you so much, Sally, for all that great information. I love to hear about the water bug doing push-ups. Lots of push-ups for his mate. That's a great image. And a great dad carrying all those babies on his back. Thank you. And thanks so much to George Mraz for taking the time to be interviewed and for being here this evening to answer some questions. I imagine some of these will be directed to you, so get ready. So the very first one, I think, Sally, I'll let you kind of answer this. It's regarding what you just talked about with the fish. How do the numbers and diversity of fish in the Oxbow compared with some of the surveys you've done in the rest of the channel?
That's a really good question, and I can't answer that so much from personal experience because given our technique with the seine nets, we don't actually do surveys in the concrete channel because our technique involves, wading into the water. So in a way, electrofishing is a little bit easier because you can do that from a boat. I do know that the Army Corps of Engineers did fish surveys in the channel, throughout the channel, and they found an extreme low diversity of fish. They actually did 3 sections. They did farther up, closer to the natural areas above the concrete channel, and then the concrete channel, and then below it. And where they did find a few more fish was up in the more natural area. So definitely we're finding a lot more in the concrete channel, and we'll be able to document that over time. Thanks.
Thank you, Sally. Great question. Appreciate that. So I have a question from Janet. She asked, are the varying depths and widths of the Oxbow, are they natural or are they planned?
So we did want some variety. So again, we wanted some shallower water and we wanted some deeper pools. And so that was kind of intentional. As far as like the widths, that was largely based on, I believe, that was largely based on what we knew from, again, this historic aerial photography where we had seen where the actual pathway of the Oxbow had been before it had been completely filled in. So that one is pretty true to what we knew to be historically the case. But again, the depths that are in the Oxbow now were in part intentionally set to have a variety. Different fish like to operate at different depths.
That's great. Thank you so much, George, for that answer. Sally, to follow up on the previous question, we have a statement from Kevin Goodwin who said, in the concrete channel portion I've electrofished, they've found only single-digit species diversity, less than 10 species, which changing dramatically when the natural channel is hit or habitat like the Oxbow. And Kevin Goodwin is with Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. So thank you, Kevin, for that. Really appreciate it. So we're gonna go ahead and move on.
You know.
We now leave the Oxbow through the new cut and head out into the concrete channel. The railroad tracks carry Amtrak trains. And now we head under Michigan Avenue. This is a future proposed site for the continuation of the Rouge Gateway Trail, which goes through this area. To refresh your memory, here's a map of the original proposed Rouge Gateway Trail. This non-motorized path we like to call a greenway will serve as an artery for people enjoying outdoor activities along our beautiful Rouge River as we continue to build it in sections. The Friends of the Rouge was recently invited to submit a proposal to the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation to support the initial phase of the planning and preparation of construction documents for Phase 2 of the Gateway Trail. Extending from the existing Phase 1 trail at the pedestrian bridge, it heads along the west side of the river under Evergreen, crosses the river north of Michigan Avenue, then travels downstream on the east side of the river to a point downstream of the Oxbow. This approximately 1 mile trail will connect to the Henry Ford. Plans for a well-connected greenway and blueway system, or we call land trails and water trails, along the Lower Rouge have garnered community support for nearly 2 decades. These non-motorized systems connect programs, projects, and communities across southeastern Michigan. The Friends of the Rouge sees the success of these bisected blueways and greenways as a means to economic redevelopment in areas touched by this trail. You can see in the image original ideas for connecting the greenway along the Rouge. While this exact design scheme may change, the idea of connecting people back to the river remains. As evidenced with the downtown Detroit Riverwalk transformation with help from the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, the rebirth of green spaces combined with stable investors has led to the redevelopment of a highly industrialized wasteland into a major community asset, an economic powerhouse. The Rouge River Water Trail Blueway, paired with a paralleled Lower Rouge River Greenway and the Rouge Gateway Trails, have the capacity to transform communities and neighborhoods connected to the water trail and adjacent foot trails. Turning communities back to their natural resources invigorates community vitality, sense of place, raises quality of life, and promotes an intrinsic sense of responsibility to steward. The city of Dearborn and the city of Wayne both have downtown centers that bisect the Lower Rouge River and the Rouge River Water Trail. This is a great opportunity to reconnect the river. So you can see here renditions of the Chicago River Wild Mile. As the legacy pollution is cleaned up and recreation can be considered, creating trails and amenities that celebrate the water and the history can help us focus on the region help us focus the region on the value of the river as a natural resource and highlight recreation while interpreting the past uses. Let's imagine together what our Rouge River could be. Connecting the Rouge is a regional community planning effort that's been initiated by Wayne County Parks. This effort will identify and create linkages between neighborhoods, communities, jobs, commercial areas, and destinations throughout the Rouge Valley. This project encompasses 3 distinct but connected project zones: Hines Drive Trail, the Lower Rouge Greenway, and the Rouge River Gateway Greenway. So we encourage you to visit the website at connectingtherouge.org. Please fill out the Connecting the Rouge kickoff survey. It only will take 5 minutes to complete.
Thank you, Marie. Well, we now head under Westbound and Michigan Avenue. As we come out the other side, on your right, you will notice a large outfall. This 13-foot outfall discharges stormwater runoff from the parking lots and rooftops of the Fairlane Mall, also known as the Fairlane Town Center. Stormwater outfalls are marked in Dearborn as part of the city's required stormwater permit. As part of the Clean Water Act, stormwater is recognized as a significant source of pollution to the river. You can see some sediment coming into the river here. Fairlane Mall includes 8,400 parking spaces and 1.4 million square feet of retail space. As we have learned, all that roof and pavement equals a lot of impervious surface, which means a lot of runoff into the Rouge River, because everything ends up in the river. When it was built in 1976, the Fairlane Mall was considered to be state-of-the-art. It included a monorail connecting the Hyatt Hotel to the main shopping area. Heaven forbid that one would try to walk that distance. With over a half-mile of track, an ice skating rink, and a 5-screen movie theater, it was unusual for that time. And Sally remembers going to the movies and riding the monorail at the old Fairlane Mall.
I do.
It was built on a 275-acre plot of land and was a joint venture of Bloomfield Hills-based Taubman Company and the Ford Motor Company Land Development Corporation, who saw it as a centerpiece of their 2,360-acre master-planned Fairlane community. So it's definitely a large piece of real estate. The monorail was originally proposed to link the Ford World headquarters, an office complex, the Fairlane Town Center, and the new Hyatt Hotel. It was a Ford experiment in personal rapid transit technology, but it was dismantled and removed in 1989. However, with retail malls like this one facing economic obsolescence, questions have been raised about the future of this space. A major redevelopment of the Ford Motor Company's world headquarters is now taking place right across the street from the Fairlane Mall. And Ford began leasing parts of the mall for their research and engineering hub in 2016. Dearborn, on the other side of Evergreen, now has student housing for the first time, and the Rouge Connector Greenway, which Marie discussed a few minutes ago, will run nearby, raising the question of how a repurposed town center might better serve the local community and the local ecology. Within the next few years, we might have the opportunity to convert this 20th century commercial dinosaur into a 21st century greenscape. As they did on top of a luxury shopping mall in Wuhan, China. Built to span the entire length of the mall, Wuhan's rooftop public park features a mix of walkways, recreational spaces, and children's play areas. Likewise, this aging Collin Creek Mall in the Dallas, Texas suburb of Plano, look at that one, is being reimagined as a mixed-use development of residential and retail surrounding a 9-acre park. These examples spark the imagination. What are your ideas for a reimagined Fairlane Town Center? As we have seen with the Rouge Gateway Master Plan and the Fort Street Bridge Park, sometimes with vision and collaboration, changes once thought impossible can turn into reality. Whatever happens in this space in the future, the river will be affected, and we must keep the health of the watershed always in mind.
As we leave Michigan Avenue and reach the end of the Army Corps concrete channel, it's a relief to find natural stream bank. We want to point out that the Army Corps conducted a feasibility study on channelizing all of the major branches and some of the tributaries. Luckily, this never happened. The plan to extend Hines Drive to Michigan Avenue was opposed by local citizens. This would also disrupt the natural habitats. The Jack Smiley led a group called Henry Ford's Wildlife Preserve, and they put a referendum on the ballot in the city of Dearborn, for which 85% of the voters rejected. The University of Michigan-Dearborn Environmental Study Area we are entering now contains some of the only land in this area specifically set aside for nature study. This area extends from Michigan Avenue north to Ford Road. Note the meandering Rouge and the lower Rouge joining the combined middle and upper Rouge on the right side. The habitats include a floodplain forest, upland woodlands, meadows, old fields, a lake, and a pond very rich in macroinvertebrates. Ahead of us now is one of the Gateway Trail bridges. This bridge connects the University of Michigan-Dearborn to downtown Dearborn. Phase 2 of this trail, as Marie told us, will connect to this paved trail and continue along the river toward Michigan Avenue. As we head under the Gateway Trail Bridge, we decided to look up. While you often hear the call of the eastern phoebe in the spring as they repeat their name, Phoebe, Phoebe, their nests can be very hard to find. Another out of sight and out of mind treasure along this river are the eastern phoebes that nest on a flat shelf-like structures under the bridges. Compare this cup nest with the cliff swallow jug-like nests that we saw last week. The nest sites of both species provide protection for the eggs and young from the weather and predators. The female of this gray-backed bird with a pale white breast builds this nest with a variety of materials. You saw mud, moss, leaves mixed with grass stems and animal hair.
What a cute bird. The lower branch joins the main branch right here. Though we will continue to paddle up to the Fairlane Estate and Dam, our water trail actually continues up the lower Rouge. The lower branch is the focus of our water trail because the flow in this branch is consistently high enough year-round due to the effluent from the Ypsilanti wastewater treatment plant. Before 1996, the lower branch suffered from very low base flow, especially during the summer months, causing dissolved oxygen levels to fall to nearly zero. So fish really couldn't survive. In 1992, the Ypsilanti wastewater treatment plant started discharging treated wastewater into the Rouge River. The additional flow coming in is not small. It currently averages 25 million gallons per day. Kind of looks like a trout stream there. While effluent may sound like a negative thing, think of it as recycled water. The additional recycled water vastly improved dissolved oxygen levels and is the main reason why the lower branch of the Rouge River is now supporting so many fish. It's also the reason we're able to create a water trail on the lower branch. The other two branches just get too shallow to support year-round paddling. Dearborn is capitalizing on this and will be installing accessible launches at the pond in Ford Field just upstream and the Dearborn Hills Golf Course near Telegraph. So instead of heading up the lower branch, we're going to head up the main branch to the conclusion of this UnCruise. We see so many turtles in this stretch. We wanted to point out one of Michigan's 10 species that's maybe a little bit lesser known, but fairly common here. Northern map turtles may look similar to painted turtles, but their shell has a keel and serrations, and they have a yellow triangular spot behind the eye, and sometimes this J-shaped yellow line on the neck that arches up. But in the Rouge, it's difficult to see the characteristic that they're named for, the patterns on their back that look like the lines on a topographical map. They spend most of their lives in water rather than on land and love to pile up together and bask communally. No social distancing for those turtles. We now continue upstream to Fairlane Estate. On the left, you can see the entrance to the new Fishway, which we'll talk about in a little bit. On your right is the mill race from the power dam with the powerhouse behind it. Up above the waterfall, you can see the estate. I'd now like to introduce Karen Marzoni, who's going to tell us a little more about Fairlane Estate, the former home of Henry and Clara Ford, the dams Ford built, and what is happening at the estate now.
I'm Karen Marzoni, and my title is Director of Landscapes at Fairlane, the home of Clara and Henry Ford. And Fairlane is owned by a nonprofit organization called Henry Ford Estate. And I think the locals have always known us as Henry Ford Estate, but we are now using the historic name of Fairlane appropriately to describe the site. And Fairlane is a National Historic Landmark. A lot of people don't know that, but it's a very special place on a national level. And what I do at Fairlane, what I'm responsible for the past almost 19 years now, is directing outdoor restoration projects and garden maintenance activities. Clara and Henry Ford started purchasing land around the Rouge River in about 1909, and they first built a bungalow, kind of a weekend retreat home, very close to the edge of the Rouge River, and later decided to build their permanent residence on the banks of the Rouge River, above the banks of the Rouge River. And in 1916, when the home was completed, the estate actually covered about 1,300 acres, and the Rouge River flowed through the estate. In 1909, we believe he had a concrete, very simple dam and brick powerhouse built on the Rouge River to generate hydroelectric power. And that was one of the first, if not the first, of the village industry dams along the Rouge River and the Raisin River. And it was an idea of being more self-sufficient with creating your own power, especially for, as you mentioned, the cottage industry approach, where farmers would find employment in the winter months working at a small power plant in their own little village industries. But in 1914, Henry Ford hired Jens Jensen, a landscape architect, to redesign the dam, build over the concrete dam, and create what appears to be more of a natural waterfall. But actually underneath all that beautiful stonework is a concrete dam, and then a very large powerhouse was built nearby that receives water from the Rouge River to generate hydroelectric power. And so that hydroelectric power after 1914 supplied all of the needs for many years for Fairlane, as well as even some other areas in the community. There's a boathouse here at Fairlane. There was a channel cut to the boathouse, and Mrs. Ford in particular had a electric boat named the Callie B after her nickname. And there are wonderful videos of Mrs. Ford piloting that electric boat up the Rouge River to visit family that also lived along the banks of the Rouge. But after Mrs. Ford's passing in 1950, a lot of the property was given to other organizations such as Ford Motor Company, Wayne County, and the University of Michigan to create the Dearborn campus. And today, Fairlane is really 17 acres and just borders one side of the Rouge River. Across the river is owned by Wayne County Parks. Fairlane's going through a multi-million-dollar, multi-year restoration project, both inside and out. The home and the interior is being restored, including all the furnishings. They're being recreated where needed, as well as repaired, the ones that are original and protected. The idea is that you'll have an immersive experience when you tour the house in the future. You know, because of COVID, we haven't been able to do some of the programming that we had intended to do this year. But I think once that's behind us, there'll be many more opportunities for the public to see the restoration in process.
Thank you for all that interesting history, Karen, and for letting us view some of the photos. Really appreciate it. Karen has assured us that the Fairline Estate grounds and the parking lot are open to the public daily from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., so you should check it out. As Karen mentioned, the Henry Ford built many village industries with mills around Michigan and formerly rural areas to take advantage of the available labor force and harness nature to power his factories. In the Rouge River watershed, he operated at least 6, namely Northville, Waterford, Phoenix, Plymouth, Newburgh, and Nankin mills. He purchased grist mills and cider mills along rivers and converted them to factories for automobile parts like regulators, horns, switches, taps, gauges, and the like. He donated the land along the mills to Wayne County in exchange for them to rebuild the dams for him to power the industries. Southeast Michigan had a greater density of manufacturing facilities during the early 20th century than New England. This gives you a perspective to what we had here in regard to these village industries. So the village industries transitioned production of auto parts to supply the arsenal of democracy, assisting in the manufacture of wartime equipment, oftentimes overseen by women. You can see women working in this image at the Phoenix Mill in Plymouth. Mr. Ford was known for offering women one of the first opportunities to earn a living wage equal to a man's during World War II. Just think of Rosie the Riveter. We hope to discuss these village industries and possible later iterations of these UnCruise trips further upstream, or we invite you to visit the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, or their website at thehenryford.org to learn more about these incredible examples of our local history. For as long as humans have been cultivating the earth, dams have been built with the intention to improve human quality of life by diverting water for power, navigation, and flood control. Additionally, dams benefit people by providing usable, reliable water sources, excellent as a drinking water source, especially in arid climates, and for economic development. Tourism, property values, fishing, swimming, boating, kind of like we see in local recreation opportunities on Newburgh Lake and on the Middle Rouge and Westland in its impoundment behind the Newburgh Dam. Up until the 19th century, dams were kept low and mainly used for irrigation until the invention of the turbine in 1832, which combined with technological developments ushered in the dam boom in the 1930s. As this technology spread, fairly autonomous government agencies like the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers became the model for water management authorities worldwide and have since assumed the role of navigation watchdogs. Michigan alone has over 2,500 dams currently regulated by the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. This chock-a-block arrangement of impediments has decimated ecosystems in our watershed and all of our Great Lakes watersheds. They choke fish movement for decades, and the worst part of it all is that most of the dams serve no purpose today. Dams block fish migration and seasonal movement to different habitat areas. They trap sediment and bury spawning areas. They cause water to heat up, leading to algal blooms and decreased oxygen levels. The DNR Fisheries Division of 1998, the Rouge River Assessment, shows 62 dams in the Rouge River watershed. There are 26 on the main branch, 12 on the upper branch, 18 on the middle branch, and 6 on the lower branch. 2 were identified as critical barriers for fish: the Fairline Estate Dam on the main branch and the Wayne Road Dam on the lower branch. Not surprisingly, dams have greatly decreased in value and popularity in the U.S. in recent decades, in part due to public outcry, citing environmental, social, and economic costs, as well as decreasing costs for alternative energy sources, lack of good locations, aging infrastructure, and the cost to continually fix them. So it's with a cost-benefit analysis in mind that we should make decisions about the construction or the removal of dams. In 2012, Wayne Road Dam was removed at a cost of just over $1 million. Built in 1914, the 3-foot dam was a major barrier for fish coming up from the Detroit River and was no longer used for its original purpose, which is to get water out of the river for the fire department. The removal of the dam opened 11 miles of a river for fish and paddlers. In the 8 years following the opening, Friends of the Rouge has documented yellow perch, gizzard shad, and northern log perch, who have greatly benefited from being able to move about the dam, as well as emerald, mimic, spotfin, and black chin shiners, spotted and golden suckers, and white bass. It's a mouthful. Interestingly enough, the removal of a dam does come with a good, which is restored ecosystems, free passage for native fish, but on the flip side, a dam also acts as a plug for keeping invasive species at bay. When the Wayne Road Dam came down, invasive round gobies that had been moving up the Rouge River from the Detroit River, but were held up by the Wayne Road Dam, were now free to move further upstream. The round goby, which is a small but very aggressive benthic fish from the Black and Caspian Seas, outcompetes native fish and is completely wiping out sensitive native fish like darters who share a similar niche. The implementation of this project has improved connectivity for fish and also inadvertently allowed Friends of the Rouge to feasibly imagine a connected water trail along the Lower Rouge. Hooray! The Friends of the Rouge was invited to celebrate the success of the Wayne Road Dam project and other Great Lakes restoration projects like this in 2017 with Senator Debbie Stabenow and members of the Alliance of Rouge Communities. So we're going to take a second break to answer your questions, but before we do that, we want to give a warm thank you to our Rouge UnCruise champions. These are people like you who love this dirty river and have donated to support this program and our other educational programs. So thank you so much. So we have a couple of more questions that have come up. I think we have a question from Mary Gelderloos, which I'd love to hear an answer from Sally about, which is, where did the Ypsilanti wastewater treatment facility discharge before 1996, and why did they start discharging to the Lower Rouge?
That's a great question. So prior to discharging to the Rouge, the plant used to discharge to the Huron River. And they still do discharge to the Huron River, but in 1992, they expanded the plant and took on a lot more area that would be sending their waste to the plant. And that was a little bit more than they would be permitted to put into the Huron River, which is why they decided to seek permission from the state to put it into the Rouge River.
Thanks so much, Sally, for that great answer and for the great question. I have a question from Janet, and I'm curious too to learn. So what can be done about the round goby, Sally? What can we do to help stop the spread?
One big thing that you can do is if you ever go fishing or wading in the water and take anything out of the river, do not transport it to another body of water. In that map that we showed you of the round goby moving up the Rouge, we were concerned about it getting above the Henry Ford Estate Dam and thinking that that was a barrier for it. And then we discovered it, round gobies, in the middle branch near Nankin Mills. And so it clearly could not have migrated upriver, and we realized those round gobies most likely got in there by fishermen there in Nankin Lake. So it's something that people really need to think about, that, you know, sometimes people will catch them. They're prolific. They're all over the bottom of all of our Great Lakes, and they're moving up the tributaries now. So it's really easy to get them. If you do catch them, you know, don't use them as bait. Don't move them anywhere else. You really just need to dispose of them. But great question.
Yeah, thanks for that great information, Sally. I think we're going to stop with the questions here. So we'll move on to the rest of our program. Thanks, everyone.
So speaking of dams, we are now about to show you the progress on the project to provide fish passage around the Fairlane Dam. This dam or waterfall is a huge barrier for fish who are not known for being able to climb 12-foot stairs. Fish swimming up from the Detroit River can get into the lower branch with no problem, and they can now go beyond the Wayne Road Dam and get to all the tributaries of the Lower Rouge. But fish trying to get farther on the main branch are impeded by this Henry Ford Estate Dam. But remember that when we open up this dam, we also need to think about, what do dams keep in place? Dams can also keep out unwanted fish like the round goby. So if you recall Marie talking about Ford's cottage industry dams, Nankin Mills and Newburgh Lake, those dams are actually there and will be left in place, and those will help to protect our freshwater trout stream, the Johnson Creek, that has some of the most sensitive fish, including our endangered minnow, which is also found up here in the upper branch, up in Sealy and Minnow Pond. We are a bit concerned because once the fish get over the dam, it's fairly free swimming up that way, and this dam is no longer really functional. So back to our dam, We're not the first to think about fish passage around Ford's Dam. He actually included a fish ladder when he built his dam in 1909. You can see it over here. And Karen told me that there's documentation that Clara's nephew fished in this fish ladder. When he rebuilt the dam in 1914 and covered it with a waterfall, it's unclear if he considered fish passage. You can still see it, the old fish ladder to the left. In this photo where they're rebuilding the waterfall, you see some small holes here. Maybe those were to be left for fish, or maybe that was just part of the construction. But nonetheless, if you look at this photo from 2006, when the waterfall went dry, as it often did in August, you can see there really are no places for fish to get up through this waterfall. So, design for the Fishway was completed in July with funding from the same source that funded the Wayne Road Dam removal and the Fordson Island boat removal. So many plans had called for opening of this dam because it would make such a difference for fish. ECT headed up the design team, and they shared their proposed design at a meeting in July 2016 with partners at the estate. Early on, it had been determined that the Fishway had to be installed from the west side of the river using land owned by Wayne County in order to preserve the integrity of the Fairlane Estate. So this plan called for accessing the site from the Gateway Trailhead over Andiamos on Michigan Avenue, coming up the Gateway Trail through the woods, and then building a bridge over the lower Rouge to access this new Fishway. The Fishway design was for a natural channel, 850 feet long with a 0.7% slope, 12 to 25 feet wide, 1.7 feet deep, and range in velocity from 50 to 135 cubic feet per second. For reference, the dam is about 2/3 of the way down on this sketch. The design looked at optimal flow for fish during spring migration, as well as flood conveyance, flow velocity, water depth, etc. It was expected that the majority of the water would be conveyed over the dam, except during very low flow conditions, then most of it would go to the Fishway. The Fishway would have riffles and pools, as shown here. In October 2016, the EPA announced a $6.5 million grant to Wayne County for this project and other habitat projects in the Rouge. Work began in the spring of 2018. Here's a photo of the building of the channel in October 2018. Looking from downstream, the estate is to your right. The channel was lined with cobble, pools were created, and wood placed to give variety to the habitat. The downstream end was open to the river in November of 2018. Trees were planted and erosion cloth placed. On November 2019, members of the advisory council, like Friends of the Rouge, were invited to tour the site. A sheet pile wall was in place at the upstream end of the Fishway with plans to hammer it down when it came time to open the Fishway to the river and to the fish. On January 22nd, 2020, the weir was hammered down and the Fishway opened to water from the river. I don't have any photos of this as the project managers were not allowing people in at the time. There was some rain in late January that was somewhat problematic. And then between March 27th and March 29th, 2.5 inches of rain fell. Millard Berry, a photographer who retired from the Press and Guide, shared this photo that he took with his drone in April. Clearly, the amount of water going through the Fishway was getting close to the amount overtopping the dam. All that water took away much of the banks and the vegetation. Newly planted trees were uprooted and erosion cloth lifted up. Water always wins. On April 30th, the weir was put back in place and the Fishway closed at the top until the vegetation can be reestablished. And here you see water down to the regular level where it would be expected to stay within that channel. So now that you know all the background on this, We're going to take you over to the Fishway to see for yourself. According to John Gundry, project manager with Wayne County Parks, the sheet piling will stay in place, blocking the flow of water through the fall and spring growing seasons. Once the vegetation is established, they will release the flow of water and open up access for fish again. In order to get the vegetation established, the public is asked not to walk onto the site. While this is not part of the Lower Rouge River Water Trail, there will be a portage around the dam along the maintenance trail to your left with a pullout and launch at either end. They do discourage anyone attempting to portage around the waterfall, which is dangerous and could cause, sorry about that, and could cause erosion and damage to the history of Thomas Edison, Jens Jensen, and Henry Ford. So they do ask people to portage along the roadway here as part of the Fishway and not attempt to try to go over the dam. So I'm now going to turn it over to Orin.
As we investigate the last location of our fifth and final UnCruise, we're getting out of our SS Kayak 1 to go beyond the dam into one of the Rouge River's floodplain forests, the oldest living community along a stretch of the river. Photographs of a floodplain forest are difficult to come by due to the difficulty of seeing subtle topographical landscape changes in two-dimensional pictures and through dense leafy vegetation. Here's a winter photograph in which the standing trees and fallen trees contrast sharply with the snow which is covering the floodplain forest floor. Take notice of this little channel of water. We'll talk about this feature in a few minutes. Obviously, a floodplain in the area of a land bordering the river channel is a natural feature, but it has a probability of flooding at any time of the year. And I emphasize any time. An important question about floodplains that we need to address is, do floods make floodplains? Well, the answer is a resounding no, they do not. We're going to take a look at a few rivers from around the world, and you'll quickly see similarities between them. First of all, here's in the southern part of the United States. There's a second example. It would be another river in another part of the world. Example 3 is a meander. And number 4, it's from Lapland. Around the world, we've seen that all the rivers meander. We don't see a straight river among them. Now take a look at this Rouge River photo prior to its channelization. Notice the cursor following the channel. We don't see straight stretches of any length. Meanders are what rivers do best. Well then, how does a floodplain develop? Look at this diagram. The arrows indicate the location in the river where the water is flowing at the greatest velocity. And note that the greatest velocity is not always in the center of the stream. Now start at the top of this diagram and imagine that you are kayaking downstream. As the water goes around the first bend, the fastest flow will carry you to the bank on the right, where the water will erode and carve into the bank as you bump up against it in your craft. The bank is called the cut bank or the concave bank, and as it carves into the bank, it picks up soil. When it gets to the next bend, shown by the third arrow, the fastest water switches to the left side and carves into these soils, making another cut bank on the left side. The slowest water, shown in blue on the right side, has less energy than the faster flowing water, and thus the particles of soil drop out and form a deposition bar. These deposition bars are visible in light color in the rivers shown on the cover of this photo of Scientific American. Note that the sandbars are on the convex side, not the concave, and so the river as the river meander goes, meander after meander. Well then, how do floodplains form? Rivers and their meandering are a dynamic process. Follow carefully the changes in the shape of this river valley over time. The bend on the right carves its way downstream and is replaced over many years by a bend on the left in the middle example. Later, the bend on the left is replaced by a bend which moved on from the right. As a result of this process of erosion of banks and deposition of sandbars over many years and even centuries, the flat floodplain is formed. So now, what is the answer to how floodplains are made? Everybody all together now? By meandering. Of course. Well, now, actually, floodplains are not totally flat. Floodplains have characteristics which may be imperceptible. As we walk by the Henry and Clara Ford estate, you will notice that their mansion is on top of a hill. In floodplain language, the land at the top of this hill is called a terrace. From the terrace to the river, we have a floodplain. Between the river and the terrace, we have several features of a floodplain. I'll use diagrams rather than photographs to illustrate. During times of flooding, water may reach the base of the terrace as indicated by the dotted line. If water goes over the terrace, it's a catastrophe. The groundwater levels in or on the soil of a floodplain vary, but because the ground levels go up and down as the water rises and falls with rain and snow melt and the river level, it's a very dynamic system. We'll look at three basic components of a floodplain. Starting from the river at the top of the bank on the right, we have a stretch of land parallel to the river called a levee. The levee is formed when the river floods. When the water flows over the channel and out of the channel and over the bank, it slows down and the sand settles out on the bank. Over time, and after many floods, the sand accumulations on the bank adjacent to the river form a levee. Meanwhile, the silt and the clay and some sand stay in the water as it spreads out over the land behind the levee. The floodplain inland from the levee is the bottomland. It will contain deposits of silt and clay, though sand may be present as well depending on the magnitude of the flood. At the base of the terrace is a low area called backswamp. After the flood abates, the water behind the levee has no place to go and accumulates in this low area. It may be wet much of the growing season and have high groundwater levels. This photo, taken on August 29 in 2020, shows a lack of ground cover vegetation in the backswamp due to high water content much of the year. The only green plant you see here is a sensitive fern. This graph is an actual transect of a 5-foot intervals of the topography of the floodplain forest from the terrace adjacent to our Fairlane Lake on campus, and it goes down to the river's edge. It covers a distance of 200 meters or 650 feet. You can see the back swamp depression and the bottomland, and in this case it looks like they have a first bottom and a second bottom. And you can see the levee. An additional feature in this location is a vegetated deposition bar separated from the original levee and the stream behind it during flooding. This is a stream that we saw in the initial winter scene photograph. Other floodplain features that you can find on our floodplain are a relic levee from rivers of many years ago, as well as isolated relic channels, annual floodplains, and vernal ponds. Please come and visit us sometime for a tour of all of these features. Well, another feature that we talked about on floodplains is a distribution of the trees at various locations in the floodplain. During the past year, Griffin Bray, Kate Truitt, and I identified and measured the circumference of all 4,946 trees on these floodplains. Each square is 1 hectare or 10,000 meters. We recorded their locations with a Trimble GPS, thanks to Dave Morris of Canton Township, and also a board member, Friends of the Rouge. I'll show you the locations of a few of the tree species to point out that the different species are not distributed randomly over the landscape. Here's black maple, by far the most common of the trees, and its distribution is over most of the floodplain. Nevertheless, There are almost no black maple trees in the area, with the most frequent flooding, as shown in the lower right, with C11, C12, and B12. Nearly all of the red oak, northern red oak, are located on the terrace above the floodplain or on a levee. Likewise, the hop hornbeam is the subdominant tree with the hardest of all wood, and it's on the terrace and on a levee near the river. The bur oak trees are clustered in a location where there's high water content much of the year, and individually they are on a mound of soil. The northern hackberries are associated down on the floodplain at a lower elevation where there is more channels and more water. The silver maple has a curious distribution. Clustered in the downstream annual flood area, it is also found on the terrace where the soil is drier. You may recognize that the silver maple is also adapted to similar drier, harsh habitats along our city streets. So the lessons we learn from the floodplain habitats along the Rouge River is that each species has its own characteristics and preferences based on water levels and soil types. Well, we've completed our historic UnCruise of the most navigable portion of our Rouge River by opening our sights, senses, minds, and imaginations to those parts of our community which have been out of sight and out of mind. At the same time, we recognize that our well-being and good health are directly or indirectly connected to each of the facilities, organizations, habitats, and processes we observed. By learning more about the diversity and complexity of our Rouge River and its surroundings, Friends of the Rouge hopes that we will enhance our sense of community and appreciation for each other as well. At this time, I want to acknowledge on behalf of the Friends of the Rouge, their champions, and members of the board of directors to offer our gratitude to the staff members for accepting a positive solution to the shutdown of our traditional dinner cruise on the Rouge due to COVID-19. We are grateful to Marie McCormick, our indomitable executive director, for having the initiative and vision to continue the tradition of offering a summer cruise. She said, "Let's go with GoPro." She wrote and presented narratives for us. Laura Edwards joined with Marie and relentlessly promoted the UnCruise with enthusiasm and passion for fundraising, which was extremely successful in convincing our donors to sponsor the UnCruise. We are deeply grateful to our intrepid and daunted Voyager leaders, Sally Petrella and Paul Stark. They deftly paddled their SS Rouge 1 kayak with their viewing comfort in mind as they traveled through uncharted and uninhabited waters to uncover a treasure trove of surprise sights and images seen only by us and from our perspective. We are a special group of adventurers. We're thankful to Dr. Paul Drous for his contributions of his knowledge, writing text, narration, and leadership of the Ford Gateway Project. He's our poster child on the opening picture of the UnCruise. We must give numerous kudos to Sally, an indefatigable person with superior organizational abilities and technical skills, who researched the topics with diligence, interviewed many guests, served as a producer, authored most of the narrative, and superbly narrated for our UnCruises. Aaron Cassidy accomplished the amazing feat of getting each UnCruise edited and up on our website for all to view at their leisure. Matthew Bertrand contributed his technical skills to make our promotions effective. All the while, Karen Hanna and Jackie Heckela and Cindy Ross willingly contributed when needed, and most importantly, carried on the organization's programs. In connection with the meaning of our recent Labor Day celebration, you have seen the results of the abilities and products of a highly dedicated group of people who are committed to meaningful work and are exemplary servant leaders. A standing ovation for all of them. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Orin. One of us has to say the thank yous, and that was Orin, but I also want to thank Orin Gelderloos, who was our very first Rouge Cruise narrator, who adapted our bus tour he did for us to a boat, who's been the wealth of knowledge and stories that form the basis for all of our tours. Like many of you on this tour, I was a student of Dr. G and would not be where I am today without his inspiration and guidance. It's been a fun 2-month relationship, meeting almost daily over Zoom to develop this UnCruise. I never could have done it without him. Thank you so much, Orin.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
The river cannot fix itself without you. If you have not taken the step already, please become a member of Friends of the Rouge tonight. Join your voice to the chorus of friends who speak and act on behalf of a better Rouge River. This ends our 5th and final UnCruise for 2020. In the meantime, the Rouge River will continue to roll at 470 gallons per second, and Paul Robeson will take us out. When he's finished, please feel free to stay on Zoom for the question and answer session.
Must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps pulling. He keeps on moving along.
That's great. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for those words. Really appreciate it. So I had a couple of questions, and Sally, this first one's for you. The UnCruise took 5 days. How long did it take you to paddle and film from Zug to Fairlane?
We actually did it in 4 days because we weren't going to paddle it all the way through, and we had to figure out where we could get in and where we could get out. So the first day we did the circumnavigation of Zug. The second day we went in at Bellinger Park and went up as far as 4th Street, but then we had to do it there and back. The third day, Paul Draus joined us, and we went in at Fordson Island and went to Schaefer and back. And then our very last day was the longest day, and that was the day we went in at Melvindale and went all the way to the Henry Ford Estate and back. That was a bit tough. It was about 6-7 hours.
Thanks, Sally. So we have another question here from Griffin, and he asked if and what are the long-term plans for maintaining the natural area along the Fishway across the river from the Fairline Estate. In terms of, especially, I think the question is really directed at invasive species management.
That land is all owned by Wayne County Parks, and therefore it will be maintained by Wayne County Parks. At this point in time, they do not have any plan for controlling invasive species on their land, although they have done some volunteer efforts.
Thanks, Sally. I think I know the answer to this one from David Smith, but it's when are the Dearborn kayak launches scheduled to be installed? It's a really good question, and I'm sure the city of Dearborn wants to know that too, but I believe they're scheduled to be installed next spring, all things going as planned. And so Friends of the Rouge would certainly love to see those kayak launches installed as soon as possible. Sally or anyone, do you have any information other than that?
I think I would just add to that the funding for those launches came from the Michigan Trust Fund. It's actually money that was set aside from oil and gas in Michigan that conservationists got allocated to fund projects, to purchase land to set aside and to do recreational projects. It's really wonderful source of money, but it has a lot of hoops that municipalities have to jump through to be able to use the money. So it's just slowed the process down. But I really do think that at this point, everything's been approved, and I think that they will have it in there this spring. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Great. Thanks so much for that additional information, Sally. I appreciate it. I have a question from Deborah, and it almost sort of looks like from Jared too, and maybe George, you would be able to answer this. What is the relationship of the Greenfield Village Lagoon and the Oxbow? Is there a relationship between the two, either hydrologically or culturally or socially?
If you mean the Swanee Lagoon, where the old Swanee steamboat used to go around, no, there is no physical connection between it and the Oxbow.
George, was that just a sort of a retention area that was dug by Henry Ford, or what's the history of that lagoon area?
I actually don't know, so I can't really address that. I don't know if my colleague Deborah Reed is still on, but she might have some more information about that. She's our curator of agriculture and landscapes.
All I know is that I believe that it was built specifically for the Sewanee steamboat. So it was a created lagoon, and that is, I'll look into it, but that's, yeah, totally separate from the channel and just for a ride attraction.
Is that area, where's the water source from?
So there is inflow and outflow.
Okay.
Not from the channel directly, but from the water retention system and the sediment system. Yeah.
Okay.
We would be
That's great
very happy
information.
to
Thank
host
you so much.
a tour at any time. And we can arrange it.
Great. That sounds great. Thank you so much for the offer. I appreciate that.
Socially distanced.
A socially distanced tour. Thank you so much. I did have a quick question for Mary. She has to ask the crown for fun or for birthday. This crown was made by my 5-year-old daughter this afternoon, who only was able to go to school half day today. So she made crowns for our whole family, and I am proudly sporting one of them. We'll take one last question here at 7:30. Dale Brown said, does Friends of the Rouge organize kayak tours or meetups outside of COVID? Great question, Dale. I'll let you answer that, Sally.
We organize 2 trips a year, and it's all on our website. Our website is therouge.org, and there's a whole section about the water trail that has fantastic information about routes to paddle, things to watch out for, and then our organized trips. So we also have a Rouge Paddling Facebook page. So that's a great place to get updated on paddling around the Rouge.
That's great, Sally. And thanks to Erin for putting that link in the chat. You can click on that link to visit our information about our water trail and all of the latest updates to that as it progresses. I did have a question about location of the Melvindale boat launch. You can find that in there. That's at the Kessie Fieldhouse in Melvindale. And besides that, I think that wraps up our questions for the evening. I really appreciate all your time and your interest in attending our UnCruise. And we certainly hope to bring you additional and future trips in the near future. It honestly was so hard to choose which information to bring on this UnCruise because there's so much history and culture and environmental information. Just choosing to slash things was such a chore. And Sally and Orin and Paul, you did such an amazing job of choosing content that was so interesting. Thank you so much for your dedication to this. Really cool. Very, very cool. You know, we're hoping next year we'll get a big grant and we're going to do a PBS special series on this next year. You never know. So I guess that's our send-off. Thank you so much for being here with us. I feel a little silly now looking at myself with the crown on, but I guess it's appropriate for an evening cap. So thank you, everyone.